Good evening, everyone, and welcome. On behalf of the Delta Sigma Theta Eastern Panhandle Alumni Chapter and the League of Women Votums, we are excited to welcome you guys and thank you for joining this webinar titled Real People Casting Personal Votes to Make Real Impact. We know that logging in, making time, and showing up, especially online, still requires commitment, and we truly appreciate it. My name is Adani Gibbs, and I serve as the chapter president of EPAC, serving both Berkeley and Jefferson counties in the state of West Virginia. And whether you're joining us as a first-time voter, a long-time voter, or someone simply interested in understanding more about the big, beautiful bill and its impact on our beautiful state, or more about Project 2025 initiative, your presence matters. Strong communities are built when people are informed and engaged, and today is about empowering our community through information. So now I'm going to turn it over to our EPAC Vice President, Carla Hunter, to give us more information on the plan for this event.
Thank you, Sor Gibbs. Again, my name is Carla Hunter, and it's my pleasure to introduce a very important video tonight. And of course, I'm going to talk about voting. And I believe that organizations like Delta Sigma Theta Sorority Incorporated and the League of Women Voters we've done outstanding job registering individuals to vote. What we are finding is that those individuals who are registered aren't voting. So how do we get them to vote? Well, voting is a personal action, and voting, of course, is an action word. And so in order to get those individuals to vote, we have to show them that it is personal for them to vote. Those issues that are important to them and to their communities, and how their vote will make a difference in their lives and the lives of their community, their families, their friends, and the future of this country. So it is my pleasure to introduce a video that was co-done by the Eastern Panhandle Alumni Chapter of Delta Sigma Theta Sorority Incorporated and the League of Women Voters, where we reached women and voters across the state of West Virginia. Enjoy.
That's not good.
Is it just me? I don't hear anything.
I don't
Yes.
hear anything either.
I don't hear the volume. Yes.
Me neither.
Me neither.
Share the sound.
Me neither.
Okay, we got some technical difficulties here. Let me try this.
You need to start over.
I will start over.
What over here, buddy?
Hello.
Let's try this one more time. I changed some settings. Okay.
I vote because I believe in democracy.
Thumbs up.
And I want to do my part to keep our democracy alive.
I vote for healthcare. I vote for my future.
I vote because it's my right
as a citizen of the United States of America.
And we vote to exercise our rights and represent because we know one vote always counts.
I vote because I realize that my voice matters. And there was a point in time when people could not vote. They could not have a say. They could not make a difference. And I know that if I'm given that opportunity to cast one vote to make a difference, that matters.
I'm voting because it's my civic obligation. I'm supporting family farm.
I'm voting for my grandchildren's future.
We vote for affordable medical care and reproductive rights.
We vote to protect the right to a free public education.
I vote because I have hope for the future.
I vote to protect my right for reproductive rights.
We vote to protect Social Security.
The reason I vote is because I believe democracy is not a spectator sport. To get the government I want, I have to participate. And so do you.
I vote because I care about my community.
Is that them?
Yeah, but I don't know. Don't know what's going on.
So this video was put together by students at James Rumsey Technical Institute. So we want to thank them for their hard work. We do know that the video may have been a little choppy due to streaming. Can we put the agenda up, please? So thank you. I'm going to turn it over. As you can see, our agenda for this evening is packed. And so I'm going to turn it over to Judy Ball with the League of Women Voters, and she is going to set the stage for us and introduce our first speaker. Thank you.
Thank you all for being here tonight. My job is to give you the briefest of the introductions I can muster about the two main topics on our agenda tonight. The first is the so-called Big Beautiful Bill, and the second is Project 2025. Now, the so-called Big Beautiful Bill, when that bill was making its way through Congress, that's what we heard it called, the Big Beautiful Bill, over and over and over again. Imagine my surprise when I found no reference at all to that title in the law that was signed on July 4th, 2025. Its official title was H.R. 1. H.R. 1 is what's known as a budget reconciliation bill. And since 1974, the budget process in Congress has followed a very specific structure. It begins with a budget resolution to set spending targets, and then individual committees take up the details, and their decisions on appropriations are put together in one massive bill to reconcile the whole. This one was more than 300 pages long, which is frankly not unusual. Under the rules, though, these reconciliation bills can be passed in the Senate with a simple majority vote. No 60-vote margin required for this kind of bill. That's important. So I'm not going to go into any greater detail here about the content of this law. That's because we have a real expert here tonight to talk about how this bill is going to affect West Virginians, and we'll get to him in just a minute. Our second topic tonight, for which we have another expert, is Project 2025. Now, I think it's safe to say that many of us ignored Project 2025 and its potential during the 2024 presidential campaign. In 2024, candidate Donald Trump stated outright that he didn't know anything about Project 2025, yet he began implementing its policies within a month of becoming president. During 2025, we could no longer ignore Project 2025. So what is it? Well, Project 2025 was subtitled the Presidential Transition Project. Its authors were primarily former Trump administration officials and the Heritage Foundation, a well-known conservative think tank. Some of those authors now serve in high-level positions in the Trump administration. That includes, for example, the director of the White House Office of Management and Budget. Now, transition plans for new administrations are not at all unusual. However, this one was published in 2023, long before the election, and it's a 900-plus page manual for reorganizing the entire federal government, agency by agency, to serve a very specific conservative agenda. But Project 2025 is not just a conservative wish list. It includes provisions to give the president power to override acts of Congress, for example. And this poses a threat to our democracy. And Nicole Adams, our second speaker, will tell us much more about this than I can. But first, I get the privilege to introduce and welcome our first speaker, Seth DiStefano, who is Senior Policy Outreach Director at the West Virginia Center on Budget and Policy. The Center is an independent, nonprofit policy research organization that benefits all of us affected by policies and budgets in West Virginia, and that means all of us. Their research and analysis supports informed public dialogue and policy. And speaking for the League and for the West Virginia chapters of Delta Sigma Theta, I can tell you that we often lean on the excellent work done by the Center for our own advocacy efforts. Seth, I'm told, is a native of Randolph County, West Virginia, a graduate of Tigris Valley High School, and he holds a Bachelor of Arts in Liberal Arts and Sciences from West Virginia University. Seth leads the government affairs work at the Center and is especially passionate about food security, tax justice issues, and building a better future for working families through policy change. Seth's going to be real busy in the upcoming legislative session. So thank you, Seth, for being here tonight to talk about the impacts on West Virginia of H.R. 1, that so-called big, beautiful bill, as passed by Congress with the support of all four of West Virginia's senators and representatives. Seth?
Thank you so much, Judy. And thank you so much for having me back. It's a real honor for the League and the Eastern Panhandle Deltas to have me back again. I was just giddy when I got the email to do this. So today, I am going to go over, I'm not going to sugarcoat this, essentially. This piece of legislation is one of the worst pieces of legislation for working families and working poor folks to ever pass in Congress. And it's important, I think, as we are engaged citizens, that we are informed citizens. And I think part of being informed is holding lawmakers accountable to the numbers and the impact of their votes and how they vote in Congress. So what I'm going to do here is share my screen. And I'm going to work through some slides as expeditiously as I can. And all right, did everyone see that? Good. First, a big shout out to my colleagues at the Center on Budget and Policy who do the analysis. Folks like Kelly Allen and Rhonda Ragambe especially were very critical in putting these analyses together. So let's talk about Medicaid first. Medicaid really took a beating in the big, beautiful bill. About 29% of West Virginians rely on Medicaid for their health care coverage. That's just over 500,000 people. And approximately 65,000 West Virginians are covered by the Marketplace Plan, which are the subsidies that the big fight with the shutdown was over. And I believe they're voting on right now in the House of Representatives. Medicaid is a matching program, which means for every dollar that states put up, depending on certain factors, the federal government will give you either your $1 or more, right? And West Virginia enjoys one of the highest federal Medicaid matches in the entire country, just about $4 for every dollar. So basically, imagine this. Imagine a deal where you could give somebody $1 and they gave you a $5 bill back. And imagine that happening to the tune of about $5 billion. That's basically what Medicaid does in its totality for West Virginia. 46% of all births in West Virginia are covered by Medicaid. 45% of kids in the state are covered by Medicaid. Just over half of working age adults with disabilities, 19% of Medicare beneficiaries, and almost 80%, 77% of nursing home residents are covered by Medicaid. So in 2014, the Affordable Care Act expanded Medicaid to cover low-income adults. This basically, through the leadership of then Governor Earl Ray Tomblin, he opted into the expansion, more or less overnight provided healthcare coverage for 165,000 West Virginians who did not have access to healthcare before. And so for a lot of these folks, this was the first time they were able to access regular care outside of the emergency room. One of the things we'll talk about here more is just how bad this is going to be for uncompensated care. The big beautiful bill is going to make uncompensated care just skyrocket across the country, and that has consequences for hospitals, and really everybody's insurance premiums, right? Because when hospitals and healthcare facilities just have to eat the cost of someone who can't afford to pay, one of the things that generally happens is that insurance premiums for everybody else tend to increase to cover the difference. That expansion, Medicaid expansion, brought in $1 billion a year for West Virginia's healthcare system, and has created thousands of jobs. One of the more unfortunate things that West Virginia's congressional delegation and some other champions of the big beautiful bill like to promote is that, well, we got to get these people to work. We got to get these people to work. And this was based on the work. This was the rationale for the work reporting requirement. But the fact of the matter is that most adults on Medicaid already work. Those who don't have good reasons why they don't, right? So 33% working full time, 11% working part time, 16% not working because they're taking care of a family member. I still count that as work, to be honest with you. If you have a loved one that needs, care, and you can't work full time because of that, you should still be able to go to the doctor when you need to. Not working due to an illness or disability, or not working because of school or some other reasons. Medicaid, is specifically the expansion of Medicaid in West Virginia, and that money, that $1 billion that it brings in year over year over year, is the most positive economic news West Virginia has over the last decade. And I think this graph really spells that out. Take a look at the percentage in non-farm employment from 2014 to 2024. It actually came out negative, right? West Virginia has not seen a lot of job growth. But when you look at the change in healthcare and social assistance employment in the same period, there's a 15% increase in jobs there, right? Growth. This is thousands of nurses, doctors, pharmacy techs, lab assistants, all these jobs created in the healthcare sector because of that federal match that brings in that $1 billion through Medicaid expansion. Truly, it's some of the only positive economic news West Virginia has seen over the last 10 years, and the OBBBA is a direct threat to that. Let's take it into Berkeley County. Just over 31,000 Berkeley County residents rely on Medicaid for their health coverage. That's about 23%, just over 23% of the population. In 2021, Medicaid, just to throw this out there, accounted for 13% of payments to WVU health systems, right? So we're going to talk about, just kind of put in context, how the big beautiful bill makes the largest cuts to Medicaid and SNAP in history. The policy change one of the policy changes, it's going to prohibit states from establishing new provider taxes or increasing rates of existing taxes. This is going to significantly pressure state budgets in early 2026. It's going to limit how the state funds its shared Medicaid funding. I think we'll talk more about the provider tax here. I'll get a little bit more in the weeds on that here in a minute. That is effective upon enactment. And it caps state-directed payments and phases down grandfathered payments already in place. So that's going to reduce reimbursements to providers by an estimated $150 million a year once phased in. What is a provider tax, you might ask? So when you look at how states finance their share of Medicaid, they do it through various sources, including general revenue, which is the state budget, and provider taxes. 49 states use healthcare related taxes to raise a portion of their Medicaid funds, but West Virginia is a little bit more reliant on the provider tax to fund its share than most states. So a provider tax is money or taxes that healthcare providers pay indirectly to pull down that federal match, right? So it's kind of a way for the healthcare sector to support itself, essentially. But one of the problems is that over the past, I don't know, 10 years or so, West Virginia has lowered its share of how much it funds Medicaid through the state budget. West Virginia only funds about a third of its share of Medicaid through the state budget. The national average is about two-thirds. When most states, have kind of that bedrock funding in their state budget, we over rely because we have, embraced the concept of flat state budgets and a lot of tax cuts over the last decade. And because of that, we end up over relying on the provider tax. We're not going to be able to do that anymore because of the One Big Beautiful Bill. The One Big Beautiful Bill freezes the percentage you can access through the provider tax, and it forces you to do even less year over year over year over year over year, right? And so this was what the Hospital Association and folks were talking about as one of their bigger concerns with the implementation of the One Big Beautiful Bill. When you talk about hospitals having to close or community healthcare clinics having to shutter their doors, this was one of the things they were really, really concerned about it. In fact, just this year, we're going to have to figure out $40 million based on this. So, we're going to have to make some decisions when it comes to the provider tax freeze. We can either increase state taxes to cover the difference, right? We can, restrict or eliminate optional services to optional populations. For those who may not know, Medicaid services come in two flavors. There's optional services, and then there's stuff you have to do. And when cuts have to be made, the optional services are the things that tend to go first. And so that's like dental coverage for adults, beyond extraction. Like you can get like restorative work and, get your teeth worked on, or I believe like prescription drug support for seniors and, substance use disorder treatment, which West Virginia's Medicaid program has been a big leader in the country on. Those things will be directly at risk as this money starts to disappear, and they have to make decisions on what to cut. Or federal lawmakers are going to need to reverse the changes. So we'll talk a little bit about the enrollee impacts and the timeline there. So there's going to be a work reporting requirement for individuals 19 through 64 covered through the expansion or a waiver. We estimate somewhere between 55 to 110,000 West Virginians are going to lose their health coverage over the next 8 years because of that. To make matters worse, those denied or disenrolled, kicked off, are going to be ineligible for subsidized marketplace coverage. So that's going to have to start no later than next January 1. Also by next January, increased eligibility redeterminations for adults. And, basically right now, when you have to prove that you're eligible for Medicaid once a year. So what they're going to do is they're going to move that up to twice a year, which doesn't really sound much like a lot, but it's additional red tape, right? It's an additional place for somebody to fall through the cracks, if you will.
Or against these.
So that, just to put that in perspective, when the public health emergency was officially brought to an end, all states around the country had to redetermine who was eligible for their Medicaid program and who was not eligible. And my colleague Rhonda did some research, did a lot of work on that, and we found out that a staggering percentage of people who got kicked off were just kicked off because of procedural reasons, right? They weren't kicked off because they were ineligible. They were kicked off because they just couldn't get to the local department, or the local department just couldn't get to them because they were understaffed. It was just, a lot of extra paperwork, which, the One Big Beautiful Bill is pretty famous for, is not advantageous for the clients and the folks who rely on these programs. It's going to remove eligibility for immigrants with humanitarian protections. This is not going to impact a lot of people in West Virginia, but for those it does impact, it's pretty rough, and it will require states to impose cost sharing up to $35 per service on expansion adults with exemptions for primary care, mental health, and substance use disorders. This doesn't sound like a lot, but the research shows, and this makes a lot of sense to me, that even modest cost sharing can and often does make people forego care, leading to, health issues become worse and a lot more serious. And ultimately costlier, right? We hear a lot of this. It's a lot of folks and some members of our delegation, we're promoting this myth that people won't get hurt because there's a work reporting requirement because we'll make sure that they can get an exemption if they need one, right? This is really kind of a political fig leaf that a lot of policymakers will use to try and pit those who they deem worthy versus as opposed to those who they deem not worthy for services like Medicaid and SNAP. And it's also just an extra layer of red tape on top of a lot of extra red tape. And so, as evidence of this, I want to show you that one state does have a medical exemption from work requirements. It's Georgia, right? This is 8 steps. These are the 8 steps you have to go through in order to qualify for that medical exemption. And I believe it's ProPublica. If you guys want to, on your free time, look up, I think it's, ProPublica, Medicaid, Georgia, fiasco or something. They did a great piece talking about how unworkable the Georgia waiver process is, right? And so, don't be fooled when someone tries to tell you, well, you shouldn't, we've got waivers. You can get a waiver. You can get a, no, actually, the waiver is just, essentially it's basically saying, don't worry about all this extra red tape that's going to create all these cracks for you to fall through. We're going to take one extra piece of red tape and set it on top, and that's what's going to protect you. That's not true. It doesn't work like that. So like I said, these policies are really just going to be awful for low income people. No way around it. A lot of low wage jobs. And remember, a lot of these folks are already working. A lot of low wage jobs just do not offer health coverage. The law requires that anyone that loses Medicaid due to non-compliance with new restrictions and red tape is ineligible for marketplace coverage. And the restrictions are going to make Medicaid coverage unavailable right when people need it the most. For instance, like when you're laid off, that's going to be just, increase hardship, increase, bad health outcomes, things that West Virginia just does not.
It's being recorded, so that's good.
Totally also locked in. You went with potatoes.
In the spirit of, we got to make a decision here. States are going to have to, implement new bureaucratic systems on work and exemption and try to figure out how an already understaffed Department of Human Services is going to deal with a work reporting requirement that could impact up to 165,000 people, forcing them to check in anywhere between, once every 2 weeks or once a month, right? That's a lot of extra work on a department that is dealing and trying to figure out how to deal with the worst foster care crisis in the country, and any number of other challenges, right? Federal lawmakers are going to need to reverse, or families are going to have to face some very difficult decisions. For instance, if you've got, like, say, for instance, a chronic illness and you take care of a parent at home, you're going to have to probably make a decision as to forego that caregiving duty, or forego your health care, right? These are the real world, real life impacts. If you're a student, perhaps that, relies on Medicaid for consistent medical care, and you're trying to get your associate's degree so you can get a better job, and all of a sudden now, you're going to have to, get a job in order to show that you're getting 20 hours of work on top of your school. These are the choices, right? This is what our congressional delegation has done to real people. $1 billion a year we estimate it's going to cost us. You pull $1 billion out of the healthcare economy in a state as small and poor as West Virginia, there will be real consequences. I mean, so like when we talk about hospitals closing their doors, we are not joking, right? You can't pull this kind of money out from underneath of a healthcare economy and not expect those types of consequences. So of the more than 31,000, I've done this presentation a lot of times and I forgot to replace Mon with Berkeley. I apologize. No offense. 31,000 Berkeley County residents on Medicaid, just over 8,900 are covered through the Medicaid expansion. This population is most impacted by the eligibility and paperwork provisions. We estimate it's going to be over 2,200 of those enrollees are going to get kicked off. That even though Berkeley County is one of the more prosperous and successful counties in West Virginia, there will be consequences. You will not be immune from the consequences just on the Medicaid side of this. There's no way around it. And so, for instance, one thing that I think that it's going to be hard to do. I know John Hardy pretty well from his days down at the legislature, and he always told me that one of his big passions was to try and build a new hospital in Berkeley County because the hospital, I guess, the one currently the county has grown so much over the past several years that people feel it's time for a bigger facility, if you will. Kicking 2,200 people off of Medicaid and losing those federal dollars that come with it, that's going to make that hard. You know what I mean? Like these provisions that limit these dollars is going to make that very, very difficult, even for a county that is growing at the pace that Berkeley County is. Let's not stop there. There's also a lot of harsh changes to the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program. As we know, Federal Food Assistance or SNAP. Harsh, ineffective time limits and work reporting requirements are going to be expanded. We estimate this is going to, probably result in just over 30,000 West Virginians getting kicked off of federal food assistance. This is going to consider children, right? Children 14 and older are now going to get wrapped up in this. West Virginians between 55 and 64, and veterans who used to be exempt, unhoused people who used to be exempt, children aging out of foster care who used to be exempt, or have lost those exemptions in this. And so, I just like to point out to people that, yes, that's, there are consequences. Anyone here who's raised a teenager can tell you what happens to your grocery bill when they become a teenager, right? Like this is not the time to be telling low-income parents, well, if you can't prove that you're holding down 20 hours of work a week, which many of them are anyway, right? That we're gonna cut your food assistance either partially or completely off. Folks often between the ages of 55 and 64, I saw my mother go through this when she went through a career change later in her career. A lot of employers just simply will not give you the time of day, right? Age discrimination is a real thing. It can be difficult to get work when you get into your 50s and 60s. It's just a real shame that our delegation, and this hits West Virginia harder. These provisions hit us much harder on a per capita basis just because of what our demographics look like. And our members of Congress just simply wouldn't hear it. They just would not listen at all. These are effective immediately. They are being rolled out now. We expect people to be getting kicked off by I'd say the tens of thousands come somewhere around the March, April area, somewhere in that neighborhood. Eliminates eligibility for immigrants with humanitarian protections. Again, this really only impacts a handful of people in West Virginia. It adds a state cost share for SNAP. So this is the one of the other weapons of the big beautiful bill. Like one of the weapons I've talked about is paperwork, right? Just excessive paperwork, right? Just bury families in so much paperwork that they can't keep up, and eventually they just get kicked off. The other weapon are just direct cuts. But one of the sneakier and more cynical weapons are a lot of cost shifting mechanisms, right? Where the federal government has said, listen, SNAP has always been, the benefits have always been 100% federally subsidized, right? And one of the provisions of the big beautiful bill is what they're targeting at what's called a SNAP error rate. And if your error rate is over a certain amount, the state will have to pay anywhere between 5 or 10 or 15% of what they otherwise would have gotten from the federal government themselves. They did this knowing full well that states don't have that kind of money. They just simply don't, especially states like West Virginia, right? And so this could cost West Virginia up to $84 million annually, right? Increases, again, the state share of the SNAP administration costs. Right now, the state of West Virginia administers SNAP, but the feds give us 75% of the money to do that. They're taking 25% of that support back. They're making it 50-50 now. That's going to be $10 million that our state legislature has to figure out how to find this year. And it eliminates the SNAP nutrition program. As we talked about cost shifts and other things, this is really going to put a lot of pressure on the overall state budget in West Virginia, right? So the damage doesn't stop by hurting families by burying them in just excessive paperwork and red tape and weaponized bureaucracy. The damage doesn't stop just with targeted cuts directly to the healthcare economy through like the things like the provider tax drawdown and things like that. There's also going to be a lot of damage if this thing doesn't get turned around to things that our state budget pays for, because we're going to take a pretty big hit. We estimate, and this is pretty funny, I can't help but point this out. There was a story in the news last week where Governor Morris, it was put out there that Governor Morrisey's revenue department has a report on the impacts of the big beautiful bill in the state budget, and they won't release it. Well, we already did, so we can go ahead and tell. We're more than happy to tell you. We estimate SNAP and Medicaid cost shifts alone could add $659 million in direct state budget costs through fiscal year 2030. That is staggering right now, because of flat state budgets and a lot of tax cuts for corporations and people who quite frankly don't need them, right? West Virginia really just doesn't have any money, right? So when they talk about, you hear stories about surpluses and that's really just more of a mirage. That's done through kind of budget, trickery or gimmicks and things like that. The bottom line is that we have woefully underpaid public sector, and they're understaffed as well, trying to do a yeoman's job on a lot of the more serious issues confronting our communities, and not even having enough money to make sure they can do that, right? State employees who can't afford their health insurance. Now, over the next 4 years, we're going to have to figure out where to find upwards of $650 million to replace those things. So like the impacts are going to ripple. They're going to impact higher education. They're going to impact economic development support grants and things like that. And on that note, it should be said that you're going to hear a lot about this, the Rural Health Transformation Fund. If you remember the fight over the One Big Beautiful Bill, you remember a really peak heated moment where the loss of hospitals, specifically the loss of rural hospitals, was a real flashpoint. People were really starting to get it, being like, wait a minute, my town could lose it's like the hospital employs more people than anywhere else in the county. We can't lose our hospital. And so what leadership in the Senate did is they came up with like a straw man, and they called it the Rural Health Transformation Fund. And it was a fund, $50 billion fund, put out there by folks like Susan Collins and Shelley Moore Capito, to try and create the public relations image that no, you don't have to worry about your rural hospitals. We're going to set up this fund, and it's going to protect rural hospitals. Well, here are some facts, right? State allotment of funding will be far less than federal funding loss once fully implemented, right? So if you even were to do this, it's woefully inadequate. $50 billion doesn't come anywhere near what you would need to subsidize the losses to Medicaid that the One Big Beautiful Bill is set to put in. The rules state in the bill that only 15% can go to provider payments to replace lost Medicaid funds. So, for instance, West Virginia got almost 200 million, right, in its first year of the Rural Health Transformation Fund. But only 30 million of that can be used to replace lost revenue for Medicaid. That's nothing. That's absolutely nothing. So, and the fund is temporary, right? It's only 5 years, and so the cuts are permanent. And so, you're going to hear a lot about this. And you're going to hear a lot about how, no, it's basically like taking a Band-Aid and putting it on a bullet wound and thinking you're just going to get better. That's all it is. Why did they do this? so they could hand out tax cuts to the wealthiest 1% of people in this country. That is the sole reason that drove the largest cuts to Medicaid and SNAP in the history of this country. Um, West Virginia will see deep reductions in federal funding, our gross domestic product, jobs, and state revenues. As a result, we're talking 886 million less in federal funding, 792 million in gross domestic product, 7,200 jobs lost, 61 million in tax revenue gone, right? I mean, when I think about these big job announcements that politicians love to get out and do they do the shovel, like the pose with the shovel breaking the ground, or the scissor with the giant oversized scissors with the ribbon and all that stuff. Even Nucor is like only scheduled, once it gets off, if it ever gets off the ground, is only scheduled, I think, to bring a couple hundred jobs in. I mean, 7,200 jobs would be an earthquake for West Virginia economically. And really, it's really the top 10% of households who get 80% of the tax benefit. The bottom 40% of households, are expected to see their income decline as a result of this bill. While households making $1 million or more, $1 million or more, and that's a lot of money if you live in West Virginia, they're gonna get a tax cut of $66,000 a year. That's more than the average West Virginia household makes in a year. And that's kind of basically what it looks like. 40% households are going to see a tax increase, even prior to the safety net cuts and tariffs. Meanwhile, the wealthiest are going to be the ones who really cash in. This is why they did this. And I would be remiss, and we put a lot of thought into this slide. I think it's the next to last slide, maybe. How can we support our communities? What can we do? I think it's important that we come together and mitigate harm as much as we can through mutual aid and effective, outreach. Food pantries are already getting crushed, and it's going to get a lot worse. So think about your local soup kitchen or your local food pantry and maybe ways you can help them. Eligible people are going to need help understanding the new requirements and jumping through the hoops and being required to stay covered. Ask your state lawmakers to step up. This is something that you can, and there's a lot of power coming out of Berkeley, Jefferson, and like Morgan County these days, right? There's a lot of political power with your state lawmakers. The fact of the matter is, states oversee implementing their own administrative policies. For instance, how often you have to report how much you're working. You could conceivably have, meet with one of your state senators and say, just for reference, Senator Rucker, I want you to put pressure on the Department of Human Services to implement these work reporting requirements for SNAP in the most gentle way they can possibly do it, right? To just, try and do it, we're not crazy about it, but, they get a lot of leeway in how they can do this, and they don't have to be a super hard or difficult about it and just make people's lives hard, right? They can do that. And of course, I think it's important that we hold our members of Congress accountable, and we tell them they need to reverse course, and we don't let them get away with gaslighting us, especially on social media. That's a real problem right now with Senator Capito. She goes out there and says things about this bill. She won't call it the one big beautiful bill anymore, which I find hilarious, right? They're trying to repackage it because people hate the one big beautiful bill because they know it's terrible, right? But it's important that we make sure that we're not putting up with false information. The facts are the facts. This is what they voted for, and they need to be held accountable to that. So with that, I'd like to thank you so much. If you want to sign up for our newsletter, it's a great way to stay informed about what we're up to. It comes out, we'll be doing it weekly through the legislature. And so it's a great way to kind of keep up with what we're doing at the state legislature. And we do expect to stay active on the federal side of things as well. So with that being said, I'm happy to answer a few questions if folks have them.
Actually, Seth, thank you very much for that very comprehensive review. maybe a little bit of a scary review of the impact of the bill on West Virginia, but we appreciate it, especially the last couple of slides about what we can do and how we should reach out to our legislators. So thank you very much. Really appreciate it. And by the way, my name is Erica Logan, and I am also a member of the Eastern Panhandle Alumni Chapter of Delta Sigma Theta. So, and I have the pleasure of introducing our next speaker. Before I do so, though, just a couple of quick housekeeping things. First of all, we will be putting in the chat a link to our survey. We ask that you all, if you're willing, to please complete the survey at the end of this program. Let us know what you think of this program so we can continue to bring programming that we think is valuable to our community. And also just a reminder that if you are not speaking, to just please keep yourself on mute. Okay. So our next speaker is Nicole Adams. She's a business development professional with a passion for politics and service. Having spent most of her career working in media, Nicole was a founding member of the Christian Science Monitor's Passcode cybersecurity publication and a partner and writer for the women-focused investment newsletter Stock Savvy. A resident of Washington, D.C., Nicole's political involvement extended to work with the Congressional Black Caucus annual legislative conference and as a volunteer with the various local and national political campaigns. Currently, Nicole leads the Project 25 education outreach group with D4 Women in Action and wrote a series on the topic for the Savannah Tribune newspaper. Nicole is an alumna of Clark Atlanta University, a founding member of the Baltimore Urban League Young Professionals Auxiliary, and a proud member of Delta Sigma Theta Sorority Incorporated. Please give a warm welcome to Nicole Adams.
Thank you so much, Sor. And thank you so much. I want to first thank my sorors of the Eastern Panhandle Alumni Chapter of Delta Sigma Theta Sorority Incorporated and the League of Women Voters of West Virginia for having me this evening. Like I said, like she said, I am a proud I live in Washington, D.C., but I am proudly from Baltimore, Maryland. And so I kind of go back and forth. So, I'm just really, really happy to be here. I got pretty good introduction, so I'm not going to, let me see if I can share my screen. I can just jump into everything. Okay, can everyone see my screen? Okay, great. Once. I'm just trying to organize. Sorry about that. Okay, so like it was said in my in the introduction, I'm not an expert. I'm more of a very someone who's just very passionate about politics. I was introduced to D4 Women in Action during the 2024 election cycle. I had started reading Project 2025 earlier in 2024, and I kind of just found my niche and thought that it would be a great opportunity for me to work with some other like-minded individuals to pull together information to try to educate the electorate on exactly what was in Project 2025. So me being a big old nerd, read the whole thing, and we put out some really good information that I'm still really, really proud of, even if things didn't turn out the way we were hoping they would. Subsequently, I ended up writing articles for the Savannah Tribune that discussed and that went over Project 2025 and especially its impact on the African American community because the Savannah Tribune is an African American focused newspaper in Savannah, Georgia. So I was really proud of what we were able to do with that. And we wrote, I believe, about 15 different articles, and they're still available in the archives if you follow the QR code that's listed above. Now, I know we kind of got an overview of what Project 2025 is. It's a right-wing wish list for the way they want to shape America. And the complete implementation of it would essentially focus power and wealth in the hands of a few predominantly white straight men who would subjugate everyone else. That's the basic overall truth of that. And like what was said before, it was developed by the right-wing group, the Heritage Foundation, and many of their members are serving within the current White House. Now, to this date, approximately 50% of Project 2025 has been implemented according to NPR and Project 2025 Tracker, but they're actually behind schedule. The bulk of the plan was actually supposed to be underway within the first 180 days of the Trump administration. The goal was to do it so quickly so that any Americans that would push back against what they were doing, it would be done so fast that they wouldn't have a time to react. So, that's a bit of a bright spot if you want to think about it that way. One of the reasons why they hit a brick wall was because they weren't expecting as much pushback from city, states, and individuals who used the lower courts to actually stop some of what they were doing. But one of the biggest issues is that they were hoping to impose martial law and be able to get, seamlessly and blanketly be able to push through legislation based on national emergency. And one of the biggest targets for being able to do that was the African American community. If any of you remember, they were trying really, really hard to get us out in the streets early on. Rolling back our history, rolling back uh, legislation that was designed to protect the African American community, and we just didn't bite. And because of that, everything kind of started crawling, and now people are starting to wake up a little bit to what this actually entails and the impact it's going to have on them. Now, there are several things that they have actually implemented, and here I'm going to tell you about some of the major initiatives. Because of the Republican-led House and Senate, it's been a breeze for the Trump administration to basically take over the federal government because they haven't pushed back. They've started to do a little bit of that recently, but for the most part, they really have not pushed back against what they've been doing. The plan was always to concentrate power within the executive branch, enabling a unilateral decision-making within the executive branch. That includes removing autonomy from previously independent agencies and making them subject to the whims of the executive branch. Though the House of Representatives is supposed to control the purse strings of the federal government, the Trump administration has been allowed to cut and deny funding on a whim, which has essentially starved several agencies. The most prominent that we can think of would be USAID, and most recently the Corporation for Public Broadcasting, which just voted to shut its doors a couple of days ago. But what may have been the most devastating are the approximate 317,000 career federal employees who've left the federal workforce in 2025 through firings, early retirement, and buyouts, largely because of cuts implemented by the Department of Government Efficiency, or DOGE. I know that you all in West Virginia have felt it. When I was working for the government, there were a lot of people who used to take that train into DC from West Virginia. My home state of Maryland, of course, DC and Virginia are feeling it really, really badly right now too. Now, this cut in workforce has had a significant impact on government services, especially within agencies like the Social Security Administration and Veterans Affairs. But a side effect of these thoughtless cuts has been attempts to call fired employees back when leadership realizes that things break without the people who know how to run it, being there and on site. So anecdotally, I actually heard yesterday from an attorney friend of mine that they have a board, a listserv or a board that they talk back and forth to one another. And some federal agencies have been slipping into these message boards trying to quietly hire attorneys because they realize they let so many of them go that there is nobody to actually defend the federal government when court cases come up against them. Now, the appointment of Pete Hegseth as head of what's now called the Department of War has rocked every branch of the U.S. military. Okay, so from the start, several military leaders were removed. A lot of them were women and people of color, and all of them were people who were removed because they did not display allegiance to the Trump administration or to Trump himself. Several military leaders have also resigned, the most high profile being Admiral Alvin Halsey, who tendered his resignation after he was given orders to bomb boats off the coast of Venezuela. There have also been rules implemented designed to make it more difficult for African Americans and other minorities to serve, including banning braids and cornrows while in uniform if you're in the military, banning the wearing of beards, which is a huge problem for Black men who may suffer from razor bumps, and which would essentially push them out of the military because they just can't shave like that. And the banning of transgender soldiers from serving, which came quickly and forced a number of trans soldiers just simply out of the military. Now, there are several examples of the Trump administration illegally bypassing Congress, but the most recent and stark example is the attack on Venezuela and the arresting of the country's president, Nicolas Maduro, an act of war by international law standards that requires approval from Congress that Trump did not get. The bombing of a village in Nigeria is another example, and the threats to Greenland, Cuba, and other sovereign territories gives an indication that this may escalate and just unlawfully escalate. Now, the Trump administration has worked to try to exert power over states through FEMA funding. Overall, he has just outright denied assistance to blue states. So one example is a town in Western Maryland that overwhelmingly voted for Trump, but that was denied several times FEMA funding when their town flooded. But he hasn't been very nice to the red states as well. And actually, an example of that is actually in West Virginia, where there was flooding. They were offered what may look like federal funding, but what it really was grants to the individuals who were affected. They made the paperwork to actually get that funding very, very difficult. And then the standard for being qualified for it was so high that so many people just simply were not able to benefit from it. So it was actually FEMA funding in name only in a lot of instances. Now, the Supreme Court ruled that it was unlawful for the Trump administration to send the National Guard troops to Illinois, which led to the administration pulling out of Chicago, Portland, and Los Angeles. But unfortunately, as far as federal policing of cities, ICE is still very much on the streets, and I'm pretty sure most of, if not all of you, have heard now that today an ICE agent fatally shot and killed an observer today in Minnesota. And one thing that some of you might not be familiar with is because Washington, D.C. is not a state. Everything that they have been blocked from doing in other states, they can still do here. So we have, before the call started, I was talking about how I live in a pretty touristy area. And at any time, we might go out to dinner or something like that, you see groups of 6 to 8 National Guard members just walking up and down the street. There's nothing to do. They're just walking. And it's as someone whose father served in the military, it's really disheartening to see the use of our troops that way. The Center for Disease Control is no longer a trusted agency. Since the appointment of RFK Jr., health information has been sparse, and what has been communicated has been called into question by health professionals. This has led to the formation of a 15-state health alliance that is basically bypassing the CDC to provide timely and reliable information to the public. They're currently, I believe, working on a website. I know it's like New York, Maryland, all of the West Coast states. And I think they're working on a database to be able to communicate that information. But it's unfortunate this is what has to happen right now in order to keep people safe. This as far as it's specifically related to women's reproductive health, the CDC fired the entire staff assigned to women and women's reproductive health. In addition to completely blocking abortion resource information, they've made it very hard to access federal family planning, maternal health, and fertility health information resources through the CDC. So that information is simply not available anymore. And now it's estimated that canceling the ACA subsidies will leave 5.7 million women of reproductive age without health insurance, leaving them all vulnerable to deadly health complications. The administration is working really hard to shutter the Department of Education. But in the meantime, in 2025, they cut $6.8 billion in public grants already allocated for professional development and student-focused programs across the board. And the plan for 2026, which is right in line with Project 2025, involves turning education funding into block grants that they'll just give to the states and the states can do whatever they want to with them. But the problem with that is the block grants they plan on giving is a cut of 70% to what they would normally get. That would essentially starve public education and especially hurts initiatives like Title I funding for low-income schools, along with the individual education programs or IEPs that are actually already under attack because a lot of families are finding that they hit a brick wall when they're trying to get these IEPs enforced and trying to get assistance in being able to implement them. The administration has cut all student loan forgiveness programs except for if you decide to join ICE. They have a student loan forgiveness program if you decide to join ICE. They also announced a plan actually starting on today to garnish the wages of millions of Americans who are listed as being in default with their student loans. In addition to canceling the SAVE program, which was actually a income-based repayment program that assisted people in repaying their loans without it impacting their entire lives. Now, I suspect all of you know by now that DEI and woke are a code for African Americans, and that's essentially how the administration is using them. The elimination of DEI programs within the federal government has had a very huge impact on women, the disabled, and veterans. The Trump administration has also been putting pressure on private industries to get rid of their diversity initiatives, with businesses like Target publicly eliminating their DEI programs, and businesses like Costco who have kept it and seemingly benefited from this decision. But there are dozens and dozens of private companies that have given in to this request by the administration who have cut outright their DEI programs. And these are a lot of businesses like Walmart, like Coca-Cola, like McDonald's, that, you know, a lot of the same people who they want to buy from them, they may not want to give upper management jobs to at this point because of this administration. Now, in my opinion, one of the most diabolical turns is the weaponization of the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, or the EEOC. This is the department designed to execute the initiatives of the 1964 Civil Rights Act. And what they're doing is they're basically turning that around to try to uncover discrimination against straight white men, with the head of the EEOC, I believe in December, posting a tweet asking for straight white men to report discrimination that they've experienced against them in the workplace, with the EEOC determining they want to use DOJ to go after these businesses if they see that there has been discrimination against these individuals. Now, during a speech a few days ago, the president outright stated that he wanted to cancel the midterm elections. I know that this talk is actually about voting, and this is where I just emphasize the absolute importance of making sure that we get out and vote. and that we get as many people out with us as we can to vote, but also to protect the integrity of our votes. Uh, his speech and wanting to cancel is just the latest in a concerted effort to deny us free and fair elections. The Voting Rights Act case that's before the Supreme Court right now threatens redistricting and which could drastically hurt minority representation in states. It's extremely important, like I said, this Zoom is doing, educating people on voting, promoting people on the need for them to get out to vote, especially in this midterm, because we're getting really close to not being able to participate in free and fair elections. So this midterm is extremely important. Now I'm coming to the end of my talk. Just from a personal perspective, just like I'm pretty sure a number of you, last year took a lot out of us for those of us, especially those of us who paid attention or were paying attention to what was going to happen and what was happening within our federal government and how it was affecting the states. I can't emphasize enough the importance of community right now and the importance of organizing with our family and friends, with our sororities and fraternities, civic organizations. Um, you know, Considering donating to your favorite cause. I have favorite HBCU because I did do a talk that was focused within our HBCUs. So, I'm going to be a little bit biased with that. But strengthening our unions and supporting our organizing efforts, especially our labor unions, they're going to be a big component in our overall fight to regain, what we've lost. And then buying local. I have a link to one particular organization that lists a number of small African American businesses, but buying local and keeping the funds within our community is even more important now than ever. And like I said, the importance of self-care. Going over this particular slide, I have to emphasize cost plus drugs. For those of you who are unfamiliar with it, this is a online pharmacy, for lack of a better term, that Mark Cuban set up several years ago, and it lists a number of widely used drugs at a discounted rate. I actually walked my mom through that process of finding her blood pressure medication. And the amount that Cost Plus Drugs was offering for that medication was actually lower than her copay. So this may be something to spread to the community, especially given, what's going to be what's happening with ACA and with healthcare. And the truth is, with drug prices going up already, this might be a really great resource for others to consider. And then this is just another resource, Black Farmers Index. I know a number of people have started buying local, and local may mean your local farm. And that's a great way to keep them, up and running, but it's also a great way to make sure that, you trust the people who are feeding you in a time where, you may not be able to trust the FDA as much. And that is the end, of my talk, but thank you again for having me.
Thank you so much.
I am trying to get off of, there we go. Get my video back on. But Nicole, thank you so much for updating us a year later into the Trump administration. So it looks like I'm frozen, so I might have to put myself back on. So thank you for that. Right now, we are definitely, this is very important that we are talking about voting and you exercising your right to vote. And right now, we are all preparing for the next West Virginia legislature to convene, and that will be January 14th. And so Delta Sigma Theta and the League of Women Voters, we are launching a postcard campaign. And so we're going to have the postcard up so you can see it. So this postcard It's not only you can see that it talks about redistricting, restricting absentee ballots and suppressing the vote, but you can write anything that you want to discuss with your those who represent you locally and federally. So we have postcards to distribute. If you are interested in getting one of these postcards, and we do have a script because we know sometimes it can be intimidating to write those who represent us, but they are working for us and they need to hear from you and hear your voice. So if you don't know what to write, we do have a script of some things that you can write about, including SNAP benefits, if that's something that's important to you, or for public education, or for Medicaid. So if you are interested in receiving one of these postcards, now we're distributing them across the chapters of the League of Women Voters, of Delta Sigma Theta in the state of West Virginia. Other civic groups are joining us. But if you as a citizen and you're on here on this webinar tonight and you would like to receive a postcard, please put your name and address in the chat. And we will make sure that you not only get a postcard, but you get access to some of the scripts that we have that if you're unsure of what you need to write. Now I would like to turn it over back to Judy Ball, who's going to set the next step. She's going to talk about the West Virginia legislative session and protecting our democracy.
No, I'm unmuted. Okay. As Carla said, legislative session's coming along. And I should also tell you about the postcards that everybody who's a member of the League of Women Voters, you'll be getting postcards in the mail, so you don't have to give us your address. Let me remind you, though, that today is January 7th, and exactly 1 week from today, our legislature is going to convene in Charleston for its annual 60-day sprint. The session always begins with the governor's State of the State address. And typically that's when he reveals his biggest legislative and budget priorities. And this year, we think he's planning to use the speech to release content from the state's official report on the big, beautiful bill, H.R. 1. Or at least that's the rationale we've been given on why they've been denying Freedom of Information Act requests for that report, as Seth mentioned. We also expect to hear about his latest ideas on cutting more income tax at the same time that West Virginia is going to be facing all of these $650+ million in costs from the H.R. 1. It ought to be really interesting, and the speech will be broadcast live, so I encourage you to watch it. So what then? Legislators from all over the state will begin introducing their bills for consideration. Last year, they introduced a total of 2,460 bills. That's not unusual, but only a fraction, last year about 10%, are actually considered, pass both houses, and may become law. So a whole lot of noise, very, very little content. The League of Women Voters, along with other advocacy organizations like the Deltas, the Center on Budget and Policy, the ACLU, and many others, monitor bills as they move through the session. But we don't monitor all bills because every organization must set priorities. We can't do it all. For the League, we monitor bills that fall into 4 priorities. We call them buckets. Bucket 1 is strengthening democracy, and that includes voting rights. Bucket 2 is safeguarding equal rights, and that's equal for everybody. Bucket 3 is protecting children and families, and that is a real challenge in West Virginia. And bucket 4 is creating a sustainable future, or what most people just call environmental protection. Also a biggie for West Virginia. What we do is we take all the bills that are introduced and we classify those that fit into these 4 buckets. And those become our priority bills. Then we track the priority bills that move through the legislative process. Many bills, in fact, go nowhere. And for those that do move, we sometimes submit written testimony, especially since the House last year stopped having public hearings. So how can you participate? Listen up. There's a way you can participate. This year, we're mounting a brand new bill tracker from Fast Democracy. One word, Fast Democracy. That's its label. You'll find it on our website, lwvwv.org. We urge you to sign up and use it. For the highest priority bills, we also will be sending out what we call Make Some Noise action alerts. That campaign uses email to contact all of our members, and then the public can get the same information through our Facebook page and through Fast Democracy on our website. Again, please follow them. And then when we ask for you to make some noise, you can respond by sending email or calling your legislators. We'll give you all the information you need to do that. And then finally, after the 60 days are over, and we all take a deep breath, we prepare the League's legislative scorecard. And that's our main voter education tool. It only deals with bills that have actually become law, and then it only deals with a subset of them because we can't expect you to consume everything. But we do this so that voters can be better informed at election time. And that's especially important for 2026 because it's an election year. You can also go to our website and look at the legislative scorecards for the past 3 years. We've been doing this for a while, and it's been very successful. So thank you very much, and we look forward to hearing from you and working with you during the legislative session so we can all make some noise so we can be heard in Charleston.
Thank you so much, Judy. We appreciate you for giving us that debrief on the legislative session and how we can play a part in it. First, I'd like to encourage everyone in attendance to complete the survey in the chat. The survey helps us to improve our programming and bring you the programs that you want to see. Second, on behalf of EPAC and the League of Women Voters of West Virginia, I'd like to thank Seth DiStefano from the Center for Budget and Policy for sharing his expertise on the Big Beautiful Bill, and Nicole Adams with Delta for Women in Action for her expertise in navigating 2025. Also, Ball and Lynn Woodmeyer, co-presidents of the League, who helped chair this event with EPAC's Social Action Committee. David Morgan, the multimedia publishing instructor at James Rumsey Technical Institute, and his student Gabby, who produced the PSA video for us, and also everyone who took the time to share in this educational webinar. Now it's time to act. If there's anything that EPAC can do to assist you in your issue-focused advocacy, please email us at EPAC, EPAC, Deltas, DELTAS @gmail.com. Thank you.